In the high-stakes world of global energy, every decision can send ripples across continents, shaping economies and altering alliances. The flow of oil is more than just a commodity. It's a lifeline that binds nations together, fueling industries, jobs, and entire ways of life. For decades, the United States and Canada once shared an unbreakable bond, built on mutual trust and a shared vision for prosperity. Their partnership was a cornerstone of North American stability, with energy trade at its heart. Canadian crude oil flowed south, anchoring economic growth and providing a steady supply that powered cities and industries across the continent. These pipelines were more than infrastructure. They were symbols of cooperation and shared destiny. But on July 31, 2025, that foundation is fracturing. A date now etched in history, marking the moment when old certainties gave way to new realities. Canada is now rerouting its oil across the Pacific, forging new alliances with Asia's booming economies. Tankers once destined for American refineries now chart courses for distant shores, signaling a dramatic shift in global energy flows. This is a seismic shift, sending shockwaves through Washington and Ottawa. Leaders scramble to respond as headlines warn of an unfolding energy crisis and diplomatic relations grow tense. Pipelines that once symbolized unity now fuel deep friction, sparking protests and political battles on both sides of the border. What was once a source of pride has become a flashpoint for division. Former President Trump calls it a betrayal, highlighting a widening rift. His words echo the frustration and anger felt by many who see this as a turning point in the relationship. Canada's pivot is a response to years of instability and protectionism from the US, marking a fundamental reevaluation of its interests. Canadian leaders argue that diversification is essential for their nation's future security and prosperity. As Canadian oil tankers head for China, India, and South Korea, they leave behind a legacy of broken trust and uncertainty. The world watches as a new chapter in energy trade begins, with far-reaching consequences. Is this a temporary fracture or a permanent realignment that will redefine North American relations for generations? Only time will tell if these wounds can heal or if the continent's energy future has been forever changed. The US-Canada Energy Partnership was built over nearly a century of shared infrastructure and mutual benefit. From the earliest days of cross-border oil transport, both nations recognized the value of working together to ensure a steady, secure flow of energy resources. This collaboration laid the groundwork for a relationship that would shape the economic and political landscape of North America. Canada became the largest, most reliable oil supplier to the US, while the American market fueled Canadian growth, especially in Alberta. The vast oil sands of Alberta transformed the region into an energy powerhouse, with American demand driving investment, innovation, and job creation across the Canadian energy sector. By the 2010s, over 3 million barrels of Canadian crude flowed daily to the US, over 95% of Canada's oil exports. This massive volume underscored the deep interdependence between the two countries, as pipelines, railways, and tankers moved oil across the border every single day. Pipelines like Enbridge and Keystone physically and economically bound the two nations. These vast networks of steel and engineering not only transported oil, but also symbolized the trust and cooperation that defined the partnership. US refineries invested billions to process Canadian heavy crude, cementing the relationship. These investments modernized facilities and created a specialized industry focused on handling the unique properties of Canadian oil, further intertwining the two economies. This trade supported jobs on both sides of the border, from oil field workers in Alberta to refinery operators in Texas and Louisiana. Thousands of families depended on the steady flow of oil and the economic activity it generated, and created a powerful political constituency. Industry leaders, workers, and politicians all had a stake in maintaining the flow of oil, making energy cooperation a top priority in both capitals. The alliance was a cornerstone of North American energy security, seen as a buffer against global instability. In times of international crisis or market volatility, the US could rely on its northern neighbor for a stable supply, reducing dependence on distant and sometimes unreliable sources. Policymakers viewed Canadian oil as a quasi-domestic resource, insulated from overseas turmoil. This perception shaped energy policy and reinforced the sense of shared destiny between the two countries. This foundation of trust and mutual benefit, however, would soon face its greatest test. New challenges, ranging from environmental concerns to shifting political priorities, began to strain the once seamless partnership. The era of seamless cooperation was about to unravel, ushering in a period of uncertainty and debate over the future of North American energy. The alliance began to crack during the Trump presidency as America First policies introduced new volatility. Tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum in 2018, justified as national security, deeply insulted Ottawa and shook the foundation of trust. The Keystone XL pipeline became a political football, with approvals and cancellations undermining confidence. The Biden administration's final cancellation of Keystone XL signaled that the U.S. could no longer be trusted on vital infrastructure. Canada realized that relying on a single, unpredictable customer was an existential risk. The breakdown of trust forced Canada to urgently pursue diversification, a strategy long discussed but never fully enacted. The era of unquestioned reliance on the U.S. was over. Canada began the difficult work of reorienting its energy infrastructure toward new global markets. In response, Canada launched a determined pivot to Asia, backed by massive infrastructure investments. The Trans Mountain expansion, completed in 2024, tripled oil flow to the Pacific, enabling exports to Asia. Canada's non-US oil exports have surged from under 5% to nearly 15%, with tankers now bound for China, South Korea, and India. US market share is declining for the first time in modern history. Canadian producers are securing long-term contracts with Asian refiners eager to diversify. New LNG terminal proposals signal a broader strategy to reach global markets. The Western Canadian Select discount has narrowed, boosting Canadian profits but raising costs for U.S. refineries. Canada is emerging as a global energy player, with its sights set firmly on the Pacific. Canada's strategic pivot to Asian markets is being widely celebrated at home as a major economic victory. With oil now fetching higher prices on the global stage, the country is seeing billions of dollars in new revenue flow into its coffers. This windfall is being touted by government officials and industry leaders as a turning point for the Canadian economy, promising greater prosperity and a stronger international presence. Massive investments are now pouring into energy infrastructure projects, fueling a surge in job creation, particularly in British Columbia. New pipelines, expanded ports, and upgraded facilities are providing employment opportunities for thousands, from engineers to laborers, and revitalizing local economies that depend on the energy sector. Yet, this rapid expansion is not without controversy. Pipeline projects are facing fierce resistance from environmental groups and many indigenous communities, who argue that the risks to land, water, and traditional ways of life are too great. These tensions are deepening internal divisions and sparking heated debates across the country. Meanwhile, Eastern Canada, which remains heavily reliant on imported oil, sees little direct benefit from the West's export boom. This has only highlighted long-standing regional disparities, fueling frustration and a sense of exclusion among residents and local leaders in Atlantic provinces. South of the border, the impact is being felt in a different way. U.S. refineries, especially in the Midwest, are grappling with higher costs and a less reliable supply of crude, eroding their competitive edge. This has led to layoffs, plant closures, and growing anxiety among workers and their families. The once stable North American oil supply chain is now in flux, forcing U.S. refineries to turn to more expensive imports from countries like Mexico or Venezuela. This shift is driving up costs for businesses and consumers alike, and raising concerns about long-term energy security. The disruption has ignited a fierce political debate in the United States over the consequences of protectionist trade policies and the cancellation of key pipelines. Lawmakers, industry groups, and activists are all weighing in, with some calling for a return to closer energy cooperation with Canada. As economic pressures mount, U.S. policymakers are facing growing calls to repair the strained relationship with Canada. However, finding a path forward is proving difficult, with deep divisions over energy, trade, and environmental priorities. In key states like Michigan and Texas, the economic pain is becoming a potent political issue, fueling protests, dominating headlines, and shaping the national conversation as communities demand solutions and accountability from their leaders. Experts are divided. Is Canada's pivot a permanent realignment or a temporary reaction to political friction? Some argue it's structural, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure like Trans Mountain hardwires Canada to the Pacific for decades. The Canadian industry's new mindset favors global markets and economic sovereignty. Others say the U.S. remains the logical market due to proximity and existing infrastructure. Tanker shipping to Asia is costly and volatile. A more collaborative U.S. policy could lure Canada back. Deep integration, refineries, grids, corporate ties still binds the two nations. Some see current tensions as products of political personalities, not irreversible trends. The future remains unwritten. Asia offers Canada opportunity, but also volatility and risk. Canada now competes with energy giants like Saudi Arabia and Russia, facing price wars and market instability. Heavy reliance on a single Asian buyer, such as China, brings geopolitical dangers. Trade could be weaponized in diplomatic disputes. Diversification within Asia is crucial to avoid swapping one dependency for another. Trans-Pacific shipping is costly and vulnerable to disruptions in choke points like the South China Sea. Canada's energy security is now tied to distant, unstable sea lanes. Asian demand is robust, but the region is rapidly investing in renewables and electric vehicles. Canada enters a competitive market just as global oil demand faces unprecedented uncertainty. Canada's export pivot unfolds as the world accelerates its shift away from fossil fuels. The global push for renewables and electric vehicles threatens long-term oil demand. Proponents argue that selling oil to Asia now funds Canada's own green transition. Critics warn that expanding oil infrastructure locks Canada into a high-carbon future, undermining climate goals. The tension between economic interests and climate commitments is stark. U.S.-Canada climate cooperation is strained, as Canada's oil expansion runs counter to U.S. climate priorities. Canada's gamble hinges on the uncertain timeline of the global energy transition. The North American energy landscape has been fundamentally redrawn. Canada is now a global energy player, balancing between North America and Asia. This shift is more than new trade routes. It's a strategic redefinition with lasting consequences. For Canada, it's a declaration of economic sovereignty and a hedge against U.S. volatility. For the U.S., it's a loss of strategic advantage and a wake-up call about the costs of protectionism. Both nations must now navigate a world where old alliances no longer guarantee economic security. The unraveling of the U.S.-Canada Energy Pact is a case study in how quickly alliances can shift. The new reality is one of competition as much as cooperation. Can this partnership be rebuilt, or are the U.S. and Canada destined to drift further apart?